Every year for the last 5 years or so, I've given up sweets for Lent. The reason is because I love them and it's hard to say no to a good cookie. And it's good for me to realize that I can live without them, that I don't have to have sweets in my life, and that Lent is a good time for me to take a step away from those delicious things and to say no to them for a while. And I would imagine that most of us have something in our lives, whether it is a food sort of addiction or some sort of bad habit or sin that it's hard for us to say no to some sinful habit that we seem to fall into and it feels inevitable to us in our lives. Well, St. Paul says to the Romans today in our first reading that he says, "Brothers and sisters, sin must not reign over your mortal bodies. Rather, present yourselves as raised from the dead to God." Present yourselves to God as raised from the dead, or raised with Jesus. And it seems like kind of some wishful thinking on Paul's part, because we know how difficult it can be to say no to sin. And how is it that it's not reigning over our mortal bodies when we seem to fall to the same sorts of sins over and over? Perhaps it's gossiping about someone at work, or something like a food addiction. But whatever it is, it feels like it's inevitable. So how can we actually do that? Well, we've been raised with Jesus. Through Jesus and his resurrection, we have that same inheritance. And he also says this. He says that we must be conformed to that pattern of teaching which we have received. That once we were slaves to sin, but now we have been conformed to that pattern of teaching. We've been transformed, and now we are freed from sin and slaves of righteousness. It's easy for us to think that it's impossible to overcome our sin because of our own experience, but it's small thinking that gets us there. It's not allowing our minds to be renewed. I think we undervalue so much our thought life in our spiritual lives. How am I thinking about this? Do I really believe that Jesus can win the victory for me, even in the small moments in my mind? How do I think about my sins? Do I think about them as something that is just always going to be with me, I can't ever overcome? Or do I say, no, I know the Lord can do this. I know the Lord can do this, and I can unite my will to him in this. I can conform myself to the teaching of the gospel. So our prayer today might be first for a renewal of our hope, to say, Lord, help me again to increase my hope in the victory here over sin, but also then to transform that sin into goodness. Help me to overcome it, to be no longer enslaved to that, but rather to be a slave of righteousness and holiness.